Hello, everybody. Welcome to my first official podcast. Basically, what I'm going to be doing in each of these episodes is, each episode is going to have a different theme. And from there, I will also, at the end, go into any, Q&A, a Q&A portion with regards to listeners' submitted questions. So for this first episode, it's obviously titled Quentin Tarantino films, and I'm just going to be running through some of my favorites of his films and talk a little bit about each of them. What they, what I think about them. Just basically giving a little bit of a mini review for each one. At least for the major ones. We'll see how time goes with regards to how much time I spend on each one. So I'm going to go in chronological order, starting with his first film all the way up to his most recent. Looking here at his first movie, it was Reservoir Dogs, which came out in 1992 and starred Harvey Keitel, Michael Madsen, Quentin Tarantino himself, Steve Buscemi, Chris Penn. Really, really solid cast, especially for a first movie to get all these guys. Kind of got most of them kind of before they exploded in their careers. And the only reason he got them, it was mainly because Harvey Keitel helped fund the movie. Kind of came in at the last second because it wasn't a very high budgeted movie, and you could tell watching it that they didn't have the largest budget. But sometimes those types of films actually, in my opinion, work out a little bit better because the smaller the budget, typically the less less cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. There's less studio interference. There's less chances of actors with big egos determining things. And, there's a better chance for the director's actual vision to get onto the screen. So looking at Reservoir Dogs, again, it came out in 92. This wasn't the first Quentin Tarantino movie that I saw. I saw it a little bit later, mainly because it was a little bit more obscure than some of his more popular movies, at least in terms of the box office and in terms of distribution and promotion. It really didn't make a lot of money. It made its budget back and then a little bit, but it wasn't a massive success like his future movies were. Anyway, though, I had seen this, I think, after a few of his other movies because I was just looking through his filmography and I found it, and I was like, this looks pretty interesting. And the premise of the movie, for those who haven't seen it, is it's a heist movie, but the gimmick is it doesn't show the heist. And it instead focuses on the characters and everything that happens before and after the heist. And without going into too many deep spoilers, basically the heist goes bad, and they're trying to figure out who and if there is a potential rat who ratted them out to the police. And from there, it kind of devolves into like a mystery type movie. It's a very contained movie, though. There's really only I think 3 sets. There's the main warehouse where most of the movie takes place before and after the heist. There's like a little restaurant scene. And then there's a scene in one of the main characters' apartments. But beyond that, there's really not much else. It's a really contained movie. It focuses more on the characters and how they are interacting with each other, their paranoia over who might be the rat if there is one, and just basically all their interactions. And the film it's interesting because a lot of reviewers, when it came out, they didn't quite get what he was going for. And there's even stories of people walking out of the audience because of one torture scene that I won't spoil for. But it's actually played more for comedy, I think. And it's very dark humor, obviously, but it's not meant to – it's meant to shock, but at the same time it's meant to be kind of funny. And, some people maybe don't have that sense of humor, and that's fine. But don't knock the film because it's not like your type of humor. because it's still very well made, and he had a clear vision of what he was going for, and he pretty much achieved it. In terms of it's a very nonlinear storytelling, and it jumps back and forth between the past and the present, and it's very interesting because it takes every single member of the team, so to speak, of all the criminals, and goes into each of their backgrounds. So as you're watching the movie, your opinions of that person are changing constantly. Like, you might think that you really sympathize with this character, but then as you explore his past, you then are like kind of questioning those sympathies, and vice versa. Maybe you think you really despise a character, and then you look into his past and you think, wow, he's had a really hard life, or he's been really loyal. Even though he's a criminal, he's still been very loyal. So it's one of those types of movies where your allegiances to a character is changing depending on your perspective, and it deals a lot with perspectivism, which is it's a really great way to make a movie. And so yeah, I would put it near the top in terms of if I was ranking all of his movies, just because it was his first movie, and he came out with his vision right away, and you could tell, like, as soon as you watch that movie, it has his type of dialogue, his pop culture references, the nonlinear storytelling, and the tracking shots. It has everything that you would think of, and it has the violence. There's a lot of violence in the movie. And so it has everything that you would expect from a Tarantino movie, and it's amazing that he found his style right away. And he pretty much stuck to it his whole career. Obviously flowing through different genres, but the crime genre is where he started off. So then after the success of that movie, the mild success of that movie, he moved to Amsterdam and he wrote what became Pulp Fiction. And this is definitely his most well-known movie. It's kind of the movie that he exploded with, and there's been so many copycats throughout the years of the movie. It was very influential. A lot of people discuss it as being a watershed moment in film history because of the violence that it portrayed on screen, and that's true. Movies had kind of gone away from violence up until this movie, and it was in terms of mainstream movies, and that can't be ignored when you're talking about the movie, but. More than anything else, I think the thing that resonates with most people, especially with me on this movie, is the dialogue, because it's not a plot-centric movie, it's a dialogue-centric movie. A lot of movies nowadays are so reliant on exposition and plot to carry the movie through and to carry audiences through that they forget that movies are about characters, and they're about people and how they interact with each other. And especially with a slew of a lot of superhero movies and blockbuster movies nowadays, they're so exposition heavy that they forget to flesh out the characters more. But this movie doesn't do that. This movie really takes its time. You get to know each character. You get to hang out with them, see what they're like. Either sympathize or not sympathize with them, depending on your depending on your background. And the basic, there is a plot to the movie. It's 4 different stories that are weaved together, basically, and each story deals with like a big theme. There's revenge, there's honor, justice, a lot, not just that, but there's a lot of other themes, but those are the big ones I would say for the movie. And then what he did with this movie, and why I really enjoy it, is he took the most common tropes you can think of, and he decided to put a little twist on them and make them his own. Like, you've got the boxing movie in it, with which we've seen so many of, like the Rocky Balboa movies, and Raging Bull. We've seen a lot, and then all the Wallace Beery type old wrestling pictures. So he took that genre with the Bruce Willis storyline, who plays like a boxer who's he's asked to throw a fight by a crime boss, and so he takes that common trope, but then he like puts it on his head. and says, well, what if the boxer didn't throw the fight? What happens if a boxer decides, like, okay, he's going to take the money to throw a fight, but then he doesn't actually throw the fight? What happens after that? Where does he go? Who does he encounter? Who goes after him? So it deals a lot with that. That's an interesting take on the boxing genre. Another type of movie that he starts out with is a movie about hitmen that are going on a job, but instead of just focusing solely on their mission and who they're trying to kill, he focuses on the interaction and the dialogue between the two hitmen, and you find out a lot more about them that way. And it's really mundane conversation, and he holds the camera on them for a very long time in one scene where they're walking down a hallway, and where most directors would cut right away to walking into a building to a completed job, he holds the camera on them and lets them discuss things that probably would be cut out of most movies, but were included in this movie, which is really interesting. And the conversations are really engaging too, because the dialogue is really witty, and it kind of rolls off the tongues of the actors. They do a really good job, especially Samuel L. Jackson, who plays one of the hitmen and who has become a regular in Quentin Tarantino's movies. He does a really good job of saying his dialogue, and Quentin Tarantino's acknowledged that as well. So him and John Travolta play these two hitmen, and they work for a boss named Marcellus Wallace, who happens to be the person that asked Bruce Willis's character to throw the fight at the beginning of the movie. So that's how those stories are related. And then Marcellus Wallace has a wife named Mia, who is played by Uma Thurman, who John Travolta is asked to, have a good time with while just basically take her out to dinner and stuff like that by his boss, Marcellus Wallace. And so you have that forbidden love story but instead of focusing on that, you see it through their dialogue exchanges. And there's a famous dance scene in the movie where they do like a twist with each other, and at this like throwback diner. And you just see how when they're dancing with each other, the foreplay between them, and also in the dialogue too, the back and forth dialogue that they have. There's a lot of tension that builds up between them throughout that storyline, and it ends kind of shockingly. I won't spoil anything else for it, but the storyline itself ends really pretty violently and shockingly, because John Travolta's character is a heroin addict. So that kind of leads into what happens with him and with Mia Wallace, Uma Thurman's character. So anyway, the movie takes all of these stories and everything comes together at the end, but it is told non-linear, kind of like Reservoir Dogs, where it jumps back and forth in terms of the chronology, but you never feel lost because he begins every single scene and he sets up every single story with just letting you get to know the characters and hang out with them for a little bit. And then as the scenes go on, you realize, oh, that person's connected to that person in this way, and so on and so forth. And this movie was really widely popular. It was nominated for many Oscars. It won Best Original Screenplay. It didn't win Best Picture. That went to Forrest Gump. But John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson were both nominated for Oscars, I believe. So it was a very successful movie. And if I was ranking them, this is my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie. I know it's a lot of people's favorites, but rightly so. I don't think he's ever topped this. It's definitely one of the most original films ever made. And it's also incredibly funny, but also has very serious moments in it. But he never takes it. He treats the film seriously, but he never takes he never treats the characters or the situation seriously, because it's always heightened reality with him. And he gets more into that later in his films, really more into the surreal and the heightened reality. But it's a little bit more grounded in his earlier films, I think. So then after that, he decided to adapt a movie, and this came out in 1997. He adapted Elmore Leonard's novel Rum Punch, which became Jackie Brown. And Jackie Brown is definitely Quentin Tarantino's most underrated movie, in my opinion. A lot of people haven't heard of it who are fans of his. or if they've heard of it, they haven't seen it because everybody says, "Oh, it's not really one of his better movies." You know, it's not like critical to watch. And I don't know what they're talking about because I think it is one of his better movies. I would put it definitely in the top half of his canon, mainly because it's his tribute to blaxploitation movies, but with like his own twist on it, so to speak. Samuel L. Jackson is in it, who plays kind of more of a villain role in this movie, but like more of a straight out villain. I mean, we still like him because he's Samuel L. Jackson and he has his charisma and his typical one-liners and good dialogue, but he plays more of a straight up villain in this movie. There's not much sympathy for him. Pam Grier plays the titular character Jackie Brown, and she was famous for her blaxploitation movies, and I think, you know, obviously Quentin Tarantino was influenced a lot by those movies growing up. So he decided to, make a movie around her, and she does a very good job in the movie. She really has to carry most of the movie because she's in practically every single scene in the movie. Very few scenes she's not in. You also have Robert Forster in the movie who plays a bail bondsman, and he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this movie. And I'm actually surprised Pam Grier did not get nominated for Best Actress because she did such a great job with this movie. But the cast is so great. You've got Michael Keaton, who plays a ATF agent. You've got Robert De Niro, who plays another criminal that's working with Samuel L. Jackson's character. You've got Bridget Fonda, who's playing like one of Samuel L. Jackson's girlfriends in the movie. I mean, this cast is just unbelievable. And obviously after Pulp Fiction, I'm sure every actor wanted to work with him, and then he could basically have his, choice. But everybody brings their A game. And the basic plot of the movie is Pam Grier plays a flight attendant who is working to smuggle money into the United States from Cabo for Samuel L. Jackson's character, who's like he's like a gun dealer. He was in drugs and then he moved into guns, but he's got all his money in Mexico, so she's got to fly it in for him, secretly. But then she gets caught by Michael Keaton's character, again, who's an ATF agent, and he's trying to bring down Samuel L. Jackson's character. So that kind of jumps the movie off. But again, this movie, I would say it is more plot focused in some areas because it relies a lot on the plot, especially towards the end of the movie. But the first half of the movie, the first 45 minutes of this movie is literally all dialogue, just sitting down with the characters and not really any plot discussion, not much plot discussion whatsoever. And a lot of critics didn't really like that. That was one of the big negatives that they had with the movie, many critics, was it takes too long to get going. But I understand what Quentin Tarantino was trying to do here. He really wanted you to get to know the characters before he really focused on the plot and see how they interact with each other, how they play off of each other. And it really is great because there are some very interesting characters in this movie. But yeah, it definitely is an underrated movie. I highly recommend watching it if you are a Quentin Tarantino fan. Even if you're not, you probably still would like this movie just because it's got great acting, a great script, really great and very innovative camera techniques that he uses. But you can see like his tribute to it's like kind of his send up or tribute to blaxploitation movies. With regards to the dialogue and the over-the-top violence. But there isn't much violence in this movie. I mean, there is a little bit in spurts here and there, but compared to Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, Jackie Brown really does not have much violence. It's much more toned down. It's a more mature film. And I think that also took people back, too, was, you got this guy who made Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and then he does more of a grounded... He probably knew he couldn't top Pulp Fiction no matter what, so he just decided, I'm going to make my adaptation this time from a novel and an author that I really like. And then he took like 6 years off before his next movie, which was the two Kill Bill movies in 2003 and 2004. I mean, I could imagine it took quite a while to write the script and to, do all the pre-production because these movies are very much very heavy on the action and the choreography that's required to make these movies. But the Kill Bill movies, I like them, but I don't put them as high in his filmography, mainly because I don't think the dialogue is as good as some of his other movies. Volume 2 definitely has better dialogue than the first movie. The first movie is more of a straight up action tribute to like the kung fu movies that he grew up with, which is interesting, and he is a really good action director, but it just doesn't have enough character moments and enough dialogue, I think. The second part, though, really does. And I think if you put both of these movies together instead of having them be split up, I think they would have been a lot. I think I would have liked it a little bit more, just because it is very jarring going from the first one to the second one, because the tone and the structure of the movies are so different. Volume 2 is more chronological. Volume 1 kind of jumps back and forth in time. It's a little more non-linear, like his other earlier movies. So, again, they're just really different films. My personal preference is for Volume 2. I know Volume 1 has better reviews on IMDb and on Rotten Tomatoes. But as a straight-up action movie, I would agree. Volume 1 has better action than Volume 2, but Volume 2 has more of Quentin Tarantino's signature dialogue and his staples for character interactions. Less the violence. There's still violence in Volume 2, but just not as much. All right, so then he decided to make in 2007 Death Proof, and this is widely regarded as his worst movie, and it was actually part of a double feature that he made called Grindhouse with Robert Rodriguez, another director who did Sin City and the Spy Kids movies. They decided to make a tribute kind of their own, B movies that were like featured at drive-ins, and they were usually kind of exploitation type movies with a lot of violence and like a lot of like female risque behavior and fast cars and a lot of guns and things like that. And I mean, I guess he largely succeeded in that respect, but it still feels like a really weak effort. Mainly because it's pretty short, and also there's just not as much really good character interactions as there are in his other movies. It focuses more on the action, kind of like the first Kill Bill volume, except not as good action. And when you watch the film, too, it's interesting because this was like the last movie of his that I saw, because I held off for a really long time seeing it because everybody said it was his worst movie, and, don't bother with it unless you're a diehard Tarantino fan and a fan of exploitation movies. And I mean, I am a diehard Tarantino fan. I never really had seen many exploitation movies, so I didn't really know what to expect going into it. But what I got was a film that it's hard to get into. It was hard for me to get into. Not that the acting wasn't good. It was just that the story was really weak. The story was weak. The dialogue was weaker than most of his other films. Not that there weren't some good scenes, but overall, I would say it was like a step down from his other movies. And also, I just couldn't get into... He scratched up the film, so when you're watching it, like there's like random cuts in places and random lines that are going across the screen. And I understand what he was trying to do with regards to how those movies used to be shown, because they didn't take very good care of the film stock, so they would be scratched up and things like that. And I understand that. I totally get that, but it does take you out of the movie sometimes, because there will be like dialogue that's just randomly missing. And there will be, scenes that you can't really see much because of all the scratches. The audio will be kind of messed up and not really synced in little bits, in little snippets. So it's hard to get into. It is definitely, I would rank it as his worst movie. Not that it's a completely irredeemable movie, because I think there are some things you can enjoy about it, like I mentioned. But overall, I would not recommend most people to see this movie. And he even admitted that it's his worst movie, and he said he can't make anything worse than that. So at least he acknowledges that, because some directors don't acknowledge when they've made a bad movie or like a lesser movie, but he did. So that was interesting and breath of fresh air. And then after that, he only took off 2 years, and he came out pretty much with a bang. I think because he realized he had made kind of like 3 movies in a row, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2, and then Death Proof, that were not as well received. So I think he figured, you know what, I have to make something that's just going to blow people out of the water, and that became Inglourious Bastards in 2009 with Brad Pitt, who plays the main character, I suppose, of the movie. Inglourious Bastards was actually the second Quentin Tarantino movie that I saw, the first being Pulp Fiction. I was in college when I saw this, and the first time I saw it, I wasn't sure if I really liked it. Like, I liked a lot of parts of it, but I wasn't sure, like, overall how much I enjoyed it. And then I saw it a few more times when it came out on Blu-ray and DVD. And then I fell in love with it. Christoph Waltz, who plays the main Nazi villain in the movie, although he doesn't consider himself a Nazi, considers himself a detective. It's one of the greatest performances ever put to film. It's definitely one of the greatest villain performances, and just overall as well, I would rank it as one of the best performances I've ever seen. What he does in that film with that character and with the dialogue that Tarantino provides him and the mannerisms that he has is just unbelievable. Because he's at the same time menacing and charming. You root for him, but you hate him. He represents everything that was horrible about Nazism, but then he also has like a sophistication about him that is endearing. And it's a great performance. He was an unknown actor before that, and Tarantino discovered him. He was like a German television actor. The amazing thing also about the performance is he speaks 4 languages in the movie. 4 languages is crazy. And he's fluent in English, French, German, and a little bit of Italian, he says. And he speaks all 4 of those in the movie at one point or another. And it's really amazing to see that, even in a foreign language with subtitles, because this film does have a lot of subtitles, that Tarantino still has the ability to really, captivate people with his dialogue and not so much with his plots. So, and this movie is nominated for so many Oscars. I think it won Best Supporting Actor for Christoph Waltz. Or no, I know it did win at that, but it didn't really win any other Oscars, unfortunately, but I thought it should have because it was easily my favorite movie of that year. And I still rank this as his second best movie behind Pulp Fiction. It is, but some people don't rate it as highly in his movies. And I mean, I suppose but it has everything you'd expect from a movie of his. It has a lot of violence, especially towards the end of the movie. He has a great tribute to Brian De Palma's Carrie at the end of the movie, with like a big explosion and a lot of fire. And it was like a total homage to Brian De Palma, who he's acknowledged as one of his favorite directors growing up. It is revisionist history because it is about a group of Jewish American soldiers who are basically getting revenge on the Nazis by going around France and Germany and scalping them, and then trying to assassinate Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels. So it's obviously not real, not based on real historical events, but it is historical in the sense that he does a really great job at capturing what those World War II feelings were, what they looked like, what the themes were in a lot of those older war movies. There's a lot of references in the movie to other war movies like Paths of Glory, The Great Escape, which he's acknowledged as one of his favorite movies. And obviously like a little bit of Schindler's List in there. But it is overall a more fun movie, obviously, than a lot of other war movies in that it's not taking itself too seriously. Some critics didn't really appreciate it because they considered it, again, like a blind pastiche, so to speak. And I don't know. I don't see that. I really enjoy the film. It is everything you would expect from a Tarantino movie. and the fact that most of it's in other languages besides English shows that his dialogue translates very well, even with subtitles. So then 3 years later, he made Django Unchained, which is, again, kind of like it's a combination of a few different genres. It's like blaxploitation meets like a Western meets a little bit of a Southern type movie. It's definitely more of a tribute, though, to spaghetti Westerns as well, as with his next film, The Hateful Eight, and Inglourious Basterds as well. But he has tributes to spaghetti Westerns sprinkled across all of his movies, but especially in these last three films. And in case you don't know what spaghetti Westerns are, they were the late 60s, early 70s films that were made in Italy that focused on the American West, such as the Clint Eastwood films, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the Dollars trilogy pretty much, Once Upon a Time in the West with Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson, the original Django, which this movie is kind of tailored off of, with Franco Nero, and Franco Nero makes an interesting cameo in the movie as well, kind of a tip of the hat, so to speak. And this film I really enjoyed this film. I think I really enjoyed it the first couple viewings. The last couple viewings, it hasn't held up as well as I thought it would. But that's not to say that it's not a great Tarantino film, because it is. It's got everything you would expect from his movies: stylized violence, really good dialogue. Sometimes it's a little bit too plot heavy. Kind of reminds me a little bit more of Jackie Brown, the second half of Jackie Brown, and Kill Bill. I'm sorry, not Kill Bill. Kill Bill Volume 1, where it's more plot than it is dialogue. Not that there isn't dialogue in the movie, there is, but it's more focused. A lot of it's more focused on the plot, which is essentially a slave is freed by a German bounty hunter who's played by Christoph Waltz. So it's a little bit different role than his Nazi in Inglourious Basterds. And Jamie Foxx plays Django, and he's freed by this German bounty hunter who is looking for these three brothers who have a bounty on their head. And it becomes kind of a little bit of a buddy road movie, so to speak, because he takes them under his wing as apprentice, and he trains them on, the life of a bounty hunter, and teaches them like how to shoot and, kind of how to put on an act, so to speak, so people don't really know what your true motives are. And then Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie. A lot of people were really excited when they heard that he was going to be playing a villain, because it's Leo. He's never really played a straight-up villain before. But the guy he plays in this movie is really despicable. There's nothing really redeemable about him besides the fact that he's pretty charismatic. He's a bastard through and through. He plays a slave, a plantation owner in the South, and he obviously has a lot of slaves, and he doesn't treat most of them very well. And the story is Jamie Foxx's character Django is trying to rescue his wife, who he finds out is actually on Leo's plantation as a kitchen house servant, slave, or whatever you want to call them. So it kind of becomes like a little bit of a revenge story at that point. But it is pretty brutal. Some of the shots in there with regards to there's like a slave kind of like a slave fight between each other, which is kind of a throwback to this blaxploitation movie called The Cotton Club. He has a lot of references to, obviously, in all of his films. He throws in little references and Easter eggs to films that influenced him growing up, and then it's fun because when you see them, you can go back and you can watch those movies and you can think, oh, so that's where he got the idea for that, and so on and so forth. But Django Unchained, it won a few Oscars: Best Original Screenplay for Quentin Tarantino, I think Best Cinematography, and Best Supporting Actor again for Christoph Waltz, winning two in a row. Not 2 years in a row, but two Quentin Tarantino performances in a row is really impressive. I think his Inglourious Basterds performance is a little bit better than this one, but this one is interesting because it is so different. He plays actually a pretty honorable bounty hunter. I mean, yes, he is a bounty hunter. He kills people for money, but He is pretty honorable, and he despises the slave trade itself, and he does free the main character at the beginning of the movie and a bunch of other slaves as well. So he's clearly against the institution itself, and probably helps that he's European. He doesn't have an American view or perspective on things. But yeah, it's still a really solid Tarantino movie. I really enjoyed it. Most people that I saw it with also really enjoyed it. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes, though, so it's a little bit longer one of his longer films, definitely. But then his most recent film, his last film on it that I'm going to cover, it was The Hateful Eight. And The Hateful Eight came out 2015, so last year. It has a really ensemble cast, and it feels like a spiritual successor to the movie Reservoir Dogs, in that it's much more contained. The whole movie takes place in two places, pretty much: a stagecoach and a haberdashery, which is like kind of an inn / place to rest on a long trail for travelers. And the movie is kind of a send up to spaghetti westerns, and also he said he was influenced by this TV show called Bonanza, and specifically an episode of that show where characters you don't know who the bad guy is and you don't know who the good guy is until like the very end of the movie, when all the loyalties are revealed. And that's kind of so kind of like the board game Clue in a sense. And it is kind of a murder mystery type movie, because they're trying to figure out who is trying to kill everybody else in the haberdashery. But then once you find out who it is, it's kind of a little bit of obviously there's red herrings throughout the movie, and the fact that it's a murder mystery, it's a little bit more plot heavy. I don't think that it holds up well in terms of repeated viewings. I'll definitely watch it again, because I've only seen it once when I saw it in theaters. But now that I know what the twist is, or like who the reveal at the end of the movie, which I won't spoil here, but I don't know how it's going to hold up to repeated viewings. Not that to say that the dialogue isn't really good, because it is. I just don't think it's as good as his previous movies. And this was definitely one of his, like, it wasn't reviewed as highly by critics or audiences, and it definitely didn't make as much money as Inglourious Basterds or Django Unchained, partially because it didn't have as big of a star. Samuel L. Jackson is the center piece of this movie, and while he is a draw, he's not a superstar on the level of Leonardo DiCaprio or Brad Pitt or Jamie Foxx or somebody like that. So that's partially probably why it didn't make as much money. Also, the movie was really long. I saw the Roadshow version, the 65mm Roadshow version, which looks amazing, by the way. I mean, the images that he created are worth watching, just because it's such a huge canvas that he creates, and the wide lenses that he has with the 65mm, which was then projected onto 70mm where I saw it. It was special. It was really neat to see, and you got like a handout, because he wanted it to feel like going to the movies back in the day when it was like an actual event. So there's there's an overture, an intermission, and then like a closing song. So it's really it really feels like a older movie in that sense, but it is still very long. The Roadshow version, at least, is over 3 hours long. And there are stretches where it kind of does drag a little bit. So I'm interested to see the shorter version, just to see how that looks. But otherwise, the film itself looks amazing. The cinematography, it won Best Cinematography, I believe, and deservedly so, because it looks amazing. And the camera work is really well done. And you would think, because the whole movie is so contained, that the big lenses wouldn't really work, but it actually does work for the movie. And because you see what's going on in the foreground and the background, because all these characters have different motives, and you're trying to figure out and piece together whose loyalties are where. And the film feels like a stage play in that respect, because it's all in this one location, and the camera that he uses, because he uses such a wide canvas, you're able to see, okay, way into the background and also in the foreground. So, and the character interactions that happen in those respective areas. So it's really interesting in that way. So yeah, that's pretty much his whole filmography. He's made 8 films. If you put which he does put together the two Kill Bill movies into one movie. I mean, and it was filmed at the same time, to be fair. It was just released in 2 different years. But so he said he's going to make 10 movies and then he's going to retire. We'll see if he does that. But, I mean, I wouldn't mind him having just a nice, solid filmography of 10 movies, because it's very hard for most directors beyond a certain number of movies to keep producing to the level of quality that they're accustomed to, especially that he has, set himself up for, which is, basically having I would argue like 4 or 5, masterpieces in his filmography, and then like 2 or 3, lesser movies, but still really good movie, and then one really bad movie, or just movie that, probably shouldn't have made. But you'd be hard pressed to find a director that hasn't made at least one bad movie, if they've made more than like 2 films. But if I was ranking his movies, in terms of all of those, I would go Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Bastards, Jackie Brown, Django Unchained. Actually, no, Reservoir Dogs, Django Unchained in 5th, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2, and then kind of together, 2 above 1, though, if we're separating them. Hateful Eight, and then last would be Death Proof, as I mentioned before. And Hateful Eight may move up a little bit. I'm not sure, though. Again, I have to see how it plays on repeated viewings, because it's the only film of his I have seen once besides Death Proof, but I don't think I'll be seeing that again. So I'm interested to see how it feels on repeated viewings. Okay, so that's pretty much it for my discussion on Quentin Tarantino. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next podcast, which will probably be looking at another director's filmography. I haven't decided on which one yet, but if you have a request, comment below and let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day. Thanks for taking some time to listen.